The arrest happened 3 days ago. What Russia just said in response could trigger the first direct conflict between a nuclear power and a West African nation. Togo didn't see this coming. Neither did Paris. But Moscow's message was clear: touch Burkina Faso's government, and there will be consequences. Not sanctions, not diplomacy, actual consequences. This isn't about one former military leader anymore. It's about whether France can protect anyone in West Africa, or if that era just ended. Macron is watching his entire post-colonial security system collapse in real time, and the threat Russia just issued means he might be next. What's happening right now will decide who controls West Africa for the next decade. The arrest of Paul-Henri Damiba just triggered something Moscow wants the entire region to understand. Russia has quietly but unmistakably signaled that any interference with Burkina Faso's government under Captain Ibrahim Traoré will not go unanswered. What started as a domestic security operation in Ouagadougou has now become a flashpoint that could redraw the boundaries of power across West Africa. And the warning isn't theoretical. It's directed at everyone watching, especially those who thought they still held influence here. Damiba wasn't just another former leader arrested on charges of destabilization. He was the man who led the first coup against Burkina Faso's elected president in January 2022, only to be overthrown himself 8 months later by Traoré in a second takeover that reshaped the country's entire trajectory. His removal marked the point when Burkina Faso decisively broke from its traditional alignment with France and began its shift toward Russia and new regional alliances. His arrest now, years after that transition, sends a message that Ouagadougou is closing the chapter on that era entirely. And it's doing so with the full backing of a new power structure that has no patience for the old order. Burkina Faso didn't just arrest Damiba and move on. It publicly accused Togo of having sheltered him after his ouster, framing the neighboring country as complicit in foreign-backed attempts to undermine its sovereignty. That accusation isn't symbolic. It's a direct challenge to Lomé's political position and its relationships with external actors. Togo, historically aligned with France and considered one of the more stable Western-facing governments in the region, now finds itself accused of enabling destabilization against a government that Moscow views as critical to its own strategic foothold in the Sahel. The implications are immediate and dangerous. This is where the Alliance of Sahel States becomes central. The AES, formed by Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger after each experienced military takeovers and expelled French forces, isn't just a symbolic bloc. It's a mutual defense pact with explicit clauses about collective response to external aggression. When Burkina Faso frames the Damiba issue as an attack on its sovereignty and accuses Togo of involvement, it's not operating alone. It's operating within a regional structure that obligates its partners to respond. And that structure is now deeply intertwined with Russian security and political support. Russia's growing role in the Sahel has been methodical and deliberate. Following the expulsion of French troops from Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, Moscow didn't simply fill a vacuum. It positioned itself as a primary external partner willing to provide security assistance without the political conditionality that defined France's approach. Russian military instructors, Wagner operatives, and security agreements have become fixtures in all 3 AES countries. More importantly, Russia has provided political cover at the United Nations and in international forums, consistently blocking or diluting criticism of these governments. That support isn't charity. It's a calculated effort to build a sphere of influence in a region France once dominated. And it's working. Moscow's signal over the Damiba arrest is part of that broader strategy. By making clear that interference with Burkina Faso could trigger consequences, Russia is testing how far it can extend deterrence in West Africa. It's also sending a message to anyone considering punitive measures, diplomatic pressure, or covert action against Traoré's government. The implication is simple. Burkina Faso is not isolated, and actions against it will be met with responses that extend beyond the bilateral level. That's a significant shift in regional dynamics, and it puts countries like Togo in an extraordinarily difficult position. Togo's vulnerability here is multilayered. Geographically, it shares a border with Burkina Faso and sits in close proximity to both Mali and Niger. Politically, it remains aligned with France and maintains security ties that the AES views as remnants of neo-colonial influence. Economically, it depends on stability and trade relationships that could be jeopardized if tensions escalate. And now, it's being publicly accused by a Russian-backed government of enabling destabilization. Lomé has limited options. It can deny the accusations, but that does little to reduce the pressure. It can seek diplomatic support from France or other regional actors, but that risks further entrenching its position as an adversary to the AES bloc. Or it can attempt to de-escalate through quiet channels. But even that requires navigating a situation where the stakes have already been raised by external powers with competing interests. For France, this crisis represents something far more serious than a single arrest or a bilateral dispute. It's a direct reflection of how rapidly its strategic position in West Africa has deteriorated. Just a few years ago, Paris maintained military bases across the Sahel, positioned itself as the primary security guarantor against jihadist insurgencies, and exercised considerable political influence over governments in the region. That architecture has collapsed. French forces have been expelled from Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Its remaining bases in Côte d'Ivoire, Senegal, and elsewhere are increasingly seen as liabilities rather than assets. And its diplomatic leverage has been systematically eroded by governments that view France not as a partner, but as a former colonial power unwilling to accept the end of its dominance. Russia's involvement has accelerated that decline. By offering security support without the political conditions France insisted upon, Moscow presented an alternative that resonated with governments frustrated by what they saw as paternalistic interference. By providing diplomatic cover and challenging French narratives in international forums, Russia undermined Paris's ability to isolate or pressure these governments. And by building a security presence on the ground, it created facts that make reversing the trend extraordinarily difficult. The Damiba arrest and Russia's subsequent warning are symptoms of this larger shift. They demonstrate that France no longer sets the terms of engagement in a region it once considered its sphere of influence. President Emmanuel Macron has publicly acknowledged the need to rethink France's approach to Africa, but rhetoric hasn't translated into effective policy. Paris has attempted to rebrand its presence, emphasizing partnership and reducing the visibility of its military footprint. But those efforts have been met with skepticism by governments that seek continuity rather than change. France's support for regional organizations like ECOWAS has also become a liability, as those institutions are increasingly viewed by the AES bloc as instruments of external influence rather than genuine regional bodies. When ECOWAS threatened sanctions or even military intervention against Niger following its coup, it only reinforced the narrative that the organization serves interests opposed to the sovereignty of Sahel governments. That dynamic has left France with fewer tools and fewer allies willing to openly align with its positions. The Damiba situation exposes just how isolated France has become. Burkina Faso can arrest a former leader, accuse a neighboring country of complicity, and receive backing from Russia and its AES partners without facing significant consequences. Togo, despite its alignment with France, finds itself vulnerable and without clear options. And Paris itself is unable to credibly respond. Any attempt to pressure Burkina Faso risks further entrenching the narrative that France is interfering in African affairs. Any effort to support Togo risks escalating tensions with the AES bloc and drawing a firmer Russian response. The strategic dilemma is real, and it's compounded by the fact that France's remaining influence depends on a dwindling number of governments that are themselves reassessing their relationships with Paris. What's unfolding in West Africa isn't just about Burkina Faso or Togo or even Russia. It's about the reconfiguration of regional power in a way that marginalizes traditional actors and empowers new ones. The AES is testing whether it can operate as a genuinely independent bloc capable of shaping security and political outcomes without deference to external powers. Russia is testing whether it can project influence and deterrence in a region far from its borders by aligning with governments that share its opposition to Western dominance. And France is confronting the reality that its post-colonial security architecture, built on military presence and political leverage, no longer functions in an environment where governments have alternatives and are willing to use them. The arrest of Damiba is a signal that Burkina Faso is consolidating its internal position and eliminating any remnants of the political structure that preceded Traoré's rise. But it's also a signal that Ouagadougou feels confident enough to challenge neighboring governments and test the boundaries of regional tolerance for its actions. That confidence comes from the support it receives through the AES and from Russia's willingness to back its moves with implicit guarantees. The question now is whether that confidence is justified and whether the regional balance has shifted enough to prevent any meaningful pushback. Togo's response will be critical. If Lomé escalates diplomatically or seeks punitive measures through regional organizations, it risks triggering a response from the AES that could include economic, political, or even security pressures. If it attempts to quietly resolve the issue, it risks appearing weak and encouraging further challenges. And if it seeks French support, it risks being seen as a proxy for external influence, which only deepens its vulnerability. There's no easy path forward, and every option carries risks that extend beyond the immediate crisis. For Russia, the situation is an opportunity to demonstrate that its influence in West Africa is not just rhetorical. Moscow has invested political capital and resources into building relationships with the AES governments, and it needs those relationships to be seen as credible and effective. A failure to back Burkina Faso in a moment of tension would undermine that credibility. A firm signal that interference will not be tolerated, by contrast, reinforces the perception that Russia is a reliable partner willing to use its leverage to protect its allies. That perception is essential to Moscow's broader strategy in Africa, and the Damiba crisis provides a clear test case. The broader regional implications are significant. If Burkina Faso can arrest a former leader, accuse a neighboring government, and face no serious consequences, it sets a precedent that other governments in the AES bloc may follow. Mali and Niger are both dealing with their own internal security challenges and regional tensions. If they see Burkina Faso successfully challenging a traditional French-aligned government with Russian backing, it could embolden them to take similar actions. That would further destabilize the regional order and accelerate the collapse of institutions like ECOWAS that have traditionally mediated disputes. France's remaining allies in the region are watching closely. Côte d'Ivoire, Senegal, and others that have maintained ties with Paris are now calculating whether those relationships remain viable or whether they risk becoming liabilities. The pressure is mounting, and the incentives to align with the emerging AES-Russia bloc are growing. Economic challenges, security threats, and popular frustration with traditional partnerships are all factors pushing governments to reconsider their positions. If the trend continues, France could find itself with almost no meaningful presence in a region it once dominated. For viewers trying to understand what's happening here, the key is recognizing that this isn't just about one arrest or one accusation. It's about the visible collapse of a regional security order and the rise of a new configuration of power that operates on fundamentally different principles. The old system was built on French military presence, economic ties, and political influence backed by regional organizations that enforced a certain set of norms. That system is breaking down because governments no longer accept those norms, and because alternative partners like Russia are willing to support them in challenging the status quo. The warning Russia is signaling isn't subtle. It's a clear message that interference with Burkina Faso will be met with consequences, and that those consequences could extend beyond the bilateral level. It's also a message to France that its ability to shape outcomes in West Africa is diminishing, and that Moscow is willing to compete openly for influence in the region. The question is whether Paris has the tools, the strategy, or the political will to respond effectively. So far, the evidence suggests it does not. What happens next will depend on how Togo responds, how the AES bloc positions itself, and whether France can find a way to stabilize its remaining relationships without triggering further backlash. But the trajectory is clear. Russia is gaining influence, France is losing it, and the regional order is shifting in ways that favor governments willing to break from traditional alignments and embrace new partnerships. The Damiba arrest is a symptom of that shift, and the warning from Moscow is a sign that the shift is accelerating. This is a moment when the stakes become unmistakably clear. Burkina Faso isn't just consolidating power domestically. It's testing the boundaries of what it can achieve regionally with Russian backing. Togo isn't just facing accusations. It's confronting a new reality where its alignment with France may be more of a vulnerability than an asset. And France isn't just dealing with a diplomatic crisis. It's watching the final remnants of its post-colonial influence in West Africa slip away, replaced by a configuration of power it no longer controls and cannot easily counter. The geopolitical implications extend beyond the immediate crisis. If the AES bloc continues to consolidate and deepen its relationship with Russia, it could fundamentally alter the balance of power in West Africa. Other regions in Africa are watching to see whether this model succeeds. If it does, it could inspire similar moves elsewhere, accelerating the decline of Western influence across the continent. If it fails, it could create instability and fragmentation that leaves entire regions vulnerable to security threats and economic collapse. Either way, the outcome will shape Africa's political landscape for years to come. For now, the arrest of Paul-Henri Damiba has become a symbol. It represents the end of one era and the beginning of another. It shows that governments in the Sahel feel confident enough to challenge their neighbors, secure enough to accuse them publicly, and backed enough by external powers to believe they can act without facing serious consequences. And it exposes just how vulnerable France has become in a region it once considered its own. The warning from Russia is the capstone to that reality. It's a signal that the rules have changed, that the power dynamics have shifted, and that anyone who fails to recognize that shift risks finding themselves isolated, exposed, and without meaningful options. What happens next could redefine not just the Sahel, but the entire trajectory of African geopolitics in the decade to come.